I never imagined a quiet evening at my cabin could turn into the kind of nightmare you only see in movies. The sun was dipping behind the trees, painting the lake with gold, and I was sipping my coffee, thinking about how peaceful life could be out here. This cabin had always been my escape from the chaos of the city. No traffic, no sirens, just the soft hum of nature. But peace has a funny way of hiding storms, and I was about to learn that the calm is always the loudest warning. For years, I'd been dealing with the HOA, Homeowner Association, but like most people, I thought of them as a minor annoyance. Fines for paint colors, complaints about lawn lengths, even threats over my dock that no one else had dared to touch. It was petty, it was absurd, but I always laughed it off. Until the day the HOA crossed a line I didn't even know existed. That evening, as I walked along the dock, I noticed two black SUVs slowly circling the lake. I didn't recognize them, but their movements were too precise to be just neighbors taking a drive. Something about the way they stopped whenever I moved, like they were tracking me, set off every alarm in my brain. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, the lake was public in parts, and I had always trusted my gut. But that gut has never been wrong when it came to trouble. A text pinged on my phone. It was from a friend who lived a few miles away, someone who worked in emergency response. "Be careful," the message read. "There's been strange activity near the East Road, fake patrols showing up." I stared at the screen, feeling the first cold twinge of fear. Fake patrols. I laughed nervously at the thought. That sounded insane. Why would anyone impersonate HOA cops? And yet, looking at those SUVs, the humor didn't last long. Something about their blacked-out windows, and the way they waited without leaving made it impossible to ignore. I went inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to focus on normal things, my evening dinner, the small stack of mail, but every creak outside made me jump. Then the phone rang. It was my neighbor, voice trembling. "They're out there, blocking the road. I think they're watching everyone." My heart stopped. I could hear the urgency, the fear in her voice, and suddenly the absurdity of HOA rules didn't matter. This wasn't about fines or lawn complaints anymore. It was about something darker. I grabbed my keys and rushed outside, peering down the road. Two men in what looked like police-style uniforms were standing there, arms crossed, stopping every car that tried to pass. Their badges didn't match any department I'd ever seen, and yet the way they carried themselves made most people hesitate. I wanted to yell at them, demand they move, but my voice caught in my throat. This was no longer just a HOA problem. Lives could be at stake. And I was about to find out just how dangerous petty authority could become. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and carrying the faint hum of a helicopter in the distance. My stomach dropped. That hum was familiar, the local rescue chopper, usually only called in emergencies. A pang of dread shot through me. If they were blocking the road, the chopper couldn't land and someone's life was literally on the line. My mind raced. How could this be happening in a quiet lakeside neighborhood? Who would do this, and why? I clenched my fists, heart hammering in my chest. The SUVs hadn't moved. The fake cops hadn't budged. And above all, the chopper was getting closer, the sound growing louder, urgency crackling in the air. I knew I had a choice. I could wait, hope for reason, or I could act. But one thing was clear: if I didn't act, someone might not make it through the night. And in that moment, staring down those imposters, I realized I was no longer just a cabin owner dealing with HOA nonsense. I was about to step into a fight that no one expected. A fight that would test every ounce of courage I had and push me to the edge of fear I never thought I could survive. The chopper's blades sliced the air above, and the shadow it cast over the lake made my heart race faster. I swallowed hard, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything. The calm was over. Chaos was about to begin. They thought they could stop a rescue. They had no idea who they were dealing with or what was about to happen next. The hum of the helicopter grew louder, a constant, almost threatening reminder that someone's life was hanging in the balance. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to think. I needed to act fast. Every second counted. I could see the shadow of the chopper dancing over the lake, and with it, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a stone on my chest. I'd never felt fear like this, not for myself, but for someone else, someone I hadn't even met. Then my phone rang. I nearly dropped it, my fingers fumbling to answer. It was the local emergency dispatch. "We have a critical patient at the East Road," the operator said, voice tense. The chopper is en route, but reports say the road is blocked by unauthorized personnel. My stomach turned. I swallowed hard, voice trembling as I asked, "Unauthorized personnel? What do you mean?" "They're calling themselves HOA Security," the operator explained. "No official authority, but they're refusing to move. We're trying to get clearance, but time is critical. Someone's condition is worsening by the minute." I felt my chest tighten. HOA Security? My mind screamed. This was no longer some petty dispute about lawn care or mailbox color. This was life and death, and the absurdity of a small-town association suddenly felt horrifying. I grabbed my jacket and ran toward the blocked road, heart pounding so loudly I was sure the men in black SUVs could hear it. I had no plan, only instinct. The closer I got, the more I realized just how serious this was. They weren't just standing there, they were organized, moving as a unit, blocking every path, their fake badges gleaming in the fading sunlight. I raised my hands, trying to stay calm, my voice shaking more from adrenaline than anything else. "You can't stop this. A life is in danger." They laughed. One of them stepped forward, a smirk on his face, and said, "This is private property. No one gets through without clearance. Rules are rules." Rules, my blood boiled, my mind raced. Who were these people to decide who lived and who died? And in that moment, a surge of determination overtook my fear. I wasn't going to let these imposters stand in the way of saving a life, not on my watch. I pulled out my phone and started broadcasting the situation live, thinking maybe the visibility would shame them or at least alert real authorities faster. The chopper hovered closer, its blades cutting through the tension like knives, the pilot's voice crackling through the radio, asking for clearance. I tried to wave frantically, but the men just blocked the view, standing rigid like statues of authority that weren't real at all. Every second felt like an eternity. I could almost hear the heartbeat of the person in trouble, every pulse a desperate countdown. I felt helpless, furious, and terrified all at once. And then, in a moment that froze me, one of the fake cops reached for his walkie-talkie, calling someone, I didn't know who. My mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Were they threatening the rescue? Trying to delay it? How far would they go? I realized I couldn't wait for reason, couldn't plead with logic, couldn't rely on luck. I had to act. My thoughts flashed back to my own training, small things I'd learned in emergencies. Every step had to count. Every move needed precision. I scanned the surroundings. There had to be another route, another way to get the chopper down. Then I spotted it. A narrow service path running along the edge of the lake, overgrown but passable. If I could clear it, guide the chopper there, someone's life might still be saved. I called out to the pilot, giving coordinates as best I could, and the blades shifted slightly, lowering closer. But the imposters noticed. "Where do you think you're going?" one of them barked, moving toward me aggressively. I felt my heart leap into my throat, but I stood my ground. "I'm saving a life, you don't get to decide that." The tension was unbearable. Time was slipping like sand through my fingers, and I knew every second wasted could be fatal. My mind raced, heart hammered, but I refused to back down. The chopper hovered just beyond their reach, and I realized I had to take a risk. A bold move, something daring that would either clear the path or put me in danger. I ran toward the service path, waving my arms, shouting to the chopper pilot to follow my lead. The fake cops hesitated, momentarily stunned by the audacity of my actions. And that moment, that tiny, precious fraction of a second, was all I needed. I glanced back, adrenaline surging, ready to face whatever came next. I didn't know if I could get through, didn't know if I could convince them to step aside, but I knew one thing. Someone's life depended on it, and I wasn't about to fail. The wind from the chopper whipped my hair across my face, the roar of the blades deafening, and I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Every instinct screamed danger, every fiber of my being demanded action, and yet a strange calm settled over me. This was it, the point of no return. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. One of the imposters stepped forward aggressively, blocking my path completely. My heart sank. I could see the panic in the pilot's eyes. I could hear it in the whirring blades above. And I knew in that instant that what happened next would define everything. My courage, their reckoning, and the life hanging in the balance. They thought they could stop a rescue. They had no idea just how far I was willing to go, Or what would happen when the feds finally got involved? I froze for a split second, heart hammering in my chest. The man in the fake HOA uniform stepped directly into my path, blocking the narrow service lane I'd found. His smirk was infuriating, almost comical if the stakes weren't so high. "This is private property," he said, arms crossed. "You can't go through here, no exceptions." My jaw tightened. "No, a life is on the line. You have no authority here. Let me through now." My voice trembled, but I forced it into steel. I'd always hated confrontation, but there was no room for hesitation now. The helicopter hovered above, blades slicing the air, impatient and furious. I could see the pilot's desperate eyes, the urgency clear even through the spinning rotors. The man laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound that made my blood boil. "You really think your yelling matters? We run this neighborhood. We enforce the rules. You want through? You'll have to deal with us." I clenched my fists. Every instinct screamed to push past, to storm him, to do whatever it took. But I couldn't risk injury. Not when the patient's life was literally counting on every second. I took a deep breath, scanning the edge of the path for anything, rocks, logs, even bushes I could use to create a diversion. And then it hit me. Their overconfidence was their weakness. They believed the rules were on their side, that they had the final say, but authority without legitimacy is fragile. I took a step forward, smiling just enough to hide my fear, and said, "You know, real cops take threats like this very seriously. You're impersonating law enforcement. That's federal. Do you really want to go there?" Their smirks faltered for the first time. One of the men glanced at the other, and I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. That tiny hesitation was all I needed. I surged forward, waving furiously to the helicopter. "Go now, follow me," I shouted over the roar of the blades. The chopper adjusted its angle, hovering lower. I could feel the wind from the blades whipping my jacket, turning my hair into a wild, chaotic curtain across my face. Every step felt like walking on a knife's edge. If they made a move, if they tried to physically stop me, it could end badly. But I couldn't stop now. I had no choice. The fake HOA cop stepped in front of me again, raising his hand as if to push me back. I froze just long enough to gauge his intentions. Then I lunged to the side, narrowly avoiding his grip, and sprinted along the narrow path. My heart pounded so hard I was sure the helicopter pilot could hear it. Every fiber of my body screamed panic, fear, and determination all at once. Behind me, the men shouted, but the narrow path and uneven terrain slowed them down. Their authority meant nothing here in this untamed stretch of land. I led the helicopter along the jagged edge of the lake, my arms flailing to guide them, shouting precise directions. "Left, left, hover, now!" My voice cracked, raw with urgency, but the pilot listened. I could feel the sweat dripping down my back, stinging my eyes. Every step, every instruction, every breath was survival. Somewhere in the distance, the patient's condition was worsening, and that thought kept me moving, kept me fearless. I didn't have time to think about danger to myself. I couldn't afford it. And then, out of nowhere, one of the imposters threw a piece of debris onto the path, trying to block the chopper's landing. My stomach dropped. I lunged forward instinctively, shoving it aside just in time. The chopper swerved, the pilot cursing into the radio, but we stayed on course. My hands were raw, my legs burned, but adrenaline and desperation kept me moving. I glanced back once and saw their SUVs skidding slightly, tires struggling on the rough terrain. They were no match for urgency and courage. This wasn't just about rules or fake authority anymore. It was about life and death, and they had no idea what they were up against. Finally, the helicopter reached the clearing I had carved out along the narrow service path. The pilot descended, skimming dangerously close to the treetops, following every instruction I yelled. The blades whipped leaves and dust into the air, creating a chaotic whirlwind, but the patient would live. And then, just as we were moments away from success, one of the imposters charged forward, as if suddenly realizing that if the rescue succeeded, their little empire of control would crumble. I braced myself for impact, heart racing faster than the rotors above. And in that heartbeat, I knew the next few seconds would decide everything. The rescue, my safety, their reckoning. They thought they could stop a life-saving helicopter, but they had no idea how far I was willing to go. And when I faced them head-on, the truth would shock everyone. The man lunged at me just as the helicopter's blades whipped past, creating a storm of leaves, dust, and panic. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I barely sidestepped, the tip of his shoulder grazing mine, and I stumbled forward, almost falling into the rough path. Every instinct screamed fight or flight, and I chose fight, not with anger but with urgency. Someone's life depended on this, and I couldn't afford hesitation. I could see the pilots struggling to maneuver the chopper through the narrow path. Their patience was thinning, the urgency palpable over the radio. "We need clearance now, move them or we can't land." I yelled back with everything I had, my voice breaking. "They're imposters, stop them." The imposters froze for a brief second at the sound of my words, as if they hadn't expected me to call out the truth. That pause was enough. I sprinted forward, forcing myself over a fallen log, my shoes slipping on the wet ground, my lungs burning with every breath. The wind from the rotor blades slapped against my face, my hair stinging my eyes, but I kept running, kept guiding the chopper. I don't know how long I had been moving, but every second felt like an eternity. My mind kept replaying the potential consequences. If the chopper couldn't land, if the patient didn't get help, I couldn't let that happen. My hands shook as I waved frantically, signaling the pilot to adjust left, then right, then back. The man who had charged me was shouting, cursing, but I blocked it out. Their threats didn't matter, not when life itself was on the line. And then I saw him, the one in charge of the fake patrols, step forward, eyes blazing. "Stop, you can't do this, you're trespassing." His voice carried authority, or at least the illusion of it, but I couldn't afford to acknowledge him. I shouted back, heart in my throat. "Authority doesn't save lives, move." For a heartbeat, I saw hesitation flash in his eyes. Maybe he realized, just maybe, that what he was doing was beyond petty rules, beyond HOA nonsense. But then he stepped forward again, and I felt the adrenaline spike. This wasn't going to end peacefully. I grabbed a branch from the ground, swinging it not as a weapon but as a deterrent, forcing him to halt. The others paused, confusion and fear flickering across their faces. The chopper swooped lower, its blades cutting the air with deafening force, the rotor wash slamming me against the dirt. My knees scraped, my palms raw from gripping the ground as I kept moving, kept signaling. The wind screamed in my ears, drowning out the threats, the curses, and the laughter of the men who had thought they were untouchable. And then, just as the chopper began its final descent, a sickening thought hit me. What if one of them lunged at the landing zone? What if their interference caused a crash? My stomach twisted, but I pushed forward anyway. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was moving despite it. I shouted again, "Clear the landing zone, now!" My voice cracked from strain, but finally I saw them step back, hesitation and fear overtaking their bravado. I didn't wait. I ran alongside the helicopter, guiding it down the rough clearing I had carved out. The rotors kicked up mud and debris, but the pilot managed to touch down, the skids scraping against the ground with a thunderous roar. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The medics were already jumping out, rushing toward the patient, and for the first time I felt a flicker of relief. Someone's life would be saved. I had done it, or so I thought. Because even in that moment of triumph, I knew this wasn't over. The men in fake uniforms were glaring, their faces red with fury and embarrassment. They weren't just defeated, they were humiliated. And humiliation has a way of turning people dangerous. I felt the weight of what was coming next pressing down on me. Confrontation, explanation, justice, or worse, retaliation. I wiped the sweat from my brow, knees trembling from the exertion, and looked at the helicopter. The patient was already being loaded aboard, medics shouting directions. I wanted to breathe, to relax, but I couldn't. I knew those imposters weren't going to vanish quietly. They had broken the law, threatened a life, and now they were exposed. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens in the distance, real sirens this time. My heart skipped. The authorities were coming. The feds, the real ones, not these pretend enforcers. Relief surged through me, tempered by exhaustion and disbelief. For the first time, I let myself wonder, would justice be fast enough? Could someone really pay for what they had almost done? And more importantly, had we avoided a tragedy, or was this only the beginning? The wind from the chopper whirled around me, carrying the sound of urgency, adrenaline, and the faint, impossible hope that somehow we had survived the first storm. But I knew better than anyone, the real storm was coming. They thought blocking a helicopter could save them, But they didn't know the real consequences were just landing, and I was ready to see them pay for every second they stole. The helicopter's rotors still spun overhead, throwing up leaves and dust like a storm. I could feel my muscles screaming from exhaustion, my heart still racing as adrenaline refused to leave my system. The patient was safe for now, but my eyes never left the two SUVs parked at the edge of the clearing. The men in fake HOA uniforms hadn't gone anywhere. In fact, their expressions were darker now, their faces twisted with anger, humiliation, and the kind of arrogance only people who feel untouchable possess. I clenched my fists. I didn't have time for fear, not anymore. Someone had tried to play God today, deciding who lived and who died, and I wasn't going to let that go unchallenged. I approached the lead imposter, my voice steady despite the tremor I could feel deep in my chest. "You can't keep doing this," I said, stepping closer. "You threatened lives today, people could have died, and you're not cops, you're frauds, do you understand that?" For a moment he just stared, jaw tight, and I thought he might lunge at me again. But then something shifted. Perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion on my face, the unwavering determination, or the realization that I wasn't alone. The medics, the helicopter pilot, the approaching sirens, they were all witnesses. He backed up slightly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I didn't wait, I had to take action before they could regroup. I pulled out my phone and called the local authorities, giving them every detail I could, license plates, descriptions, everything. "They're impersonating law enforcement," I said, voice raw with urgency. "They blocked a life-saving rescue. I need backup immediately. Please, someone is at risk." The imposters shouted at me to stop, calling me names, accusing me of trespassing, of breaking HOA rules, of interfering with their authority. But I couldn't focus on their absurd threats. Every word they said was a reminder of how dangerous arrogance can be. Their fake authority had almost cost a life, and I wasn't going to let them off that easily. The chopper pilot gave me a thumbs up from above, a silent signal of solidarity. We had done our part to save a life, but the confrontation wasn't over. I glanced at the narrow path we'd cleared and realized how close disaster had been. A second later, I would have been out of options, and I didn't want anyone else facing that fear. I took a step closer, voice rising, filled with a mix of anger and determination. "This ends today. You won't threaten anyone else. You won't block emergency responders. And you certainly won't scare me into silence. You're going to be held accountable." For the first time, I saw real hesitation in their movements. One of them fumbled with a radio, as if unsure whether to call backup or pretend nothing had happened. That moment was all the leverage I needed. I continued speaking, calmly but firmly, making it clear that their little charade was over. Then in the distance, real sirens grew louder. My heart leapt. Relief surged through me, but I stayed vigilant. These men were dangerous because they had nothing to lose, but the arrival of actual authorities shifted the balance. The imposters exchanged panicked glances, realizing they couldn't intimidate anyone now. The lead man finally stepped back, shoulders slumping in frustration and fear. I could see the edge of panic creeping into his eyes. I kept my voice steady, guiding them through what I knew would be the consequences. "Authorities are here. You're being reported. You're done. Anyone who thinks they can impersonate cops and block life-saving efforts will answer for it." As the real police and eventually federal agents approached, I took a deep breath, letting some of the tension finally drain. Every nerve in my body ached, but there was a strange clarity now. The confrontation had shifted from chaos to control, and justice was finally arriving. The imposters muttered and argued among themselves, but the truth was undeniable. They had been exposed, their false authority shredded by courage, urgency, and the presence of real law enforcement. I felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and simmering anger. This wasn't just about saving a life anymore. It was about making sure this never happened again. Watching the officers move in, handcuffs at the ready, I felt a strange sense of vindication. The medics had stabilized the patient. The helicopter prepared to take off, and those who had thought themselves untouchable were now facing the consequences of their reckless, dangerous actions. Even as the adrenaline began to fade, I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been. A few seconds, a few wrong moves, and everything could have gone horribly wrong. And yet, I knew one thing for sure: courage, clarity, and quick thinking had made the difference. I stood there, chest heaving, watching the imposters get handcuffed, realizing that today had changed more than just one life. It had exposed the absurdity, the danger, and the terrifying consequences of people abusing fake authority. And as I looked up at the chopper ascending into the sky, I allowed myself one small smile. Someone had lived today because I refused to back down. But even in that moment of victory, a nagging thought remained. There were still questions. How had they gotten away with this for so long? What else were they capable of? And most importantly, was justice really finished? They thought they were untouchable. But the feds were coming, and when they arrived, the full extent of their deception would shock everyone. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the trees and bouncing off the lake. Real law enforcement had finally arrived, and I could see the relief on the pilot's face as the helicopter hovered safely above. But I didn't let myself relax. My eyes never left the fake HOA enforcers, still trembling in anger and humiliation as uniformed officers moved toward them with purpose. I stepped back, letting the professionals take over, but my mind was racing. I had to understand how deep this went. How had these imposters been allowed to wield power like this? For years, I dismissed the HOA as annoying, petty, sometimes ridiculous. But this was something darker. This was a calculated, dangerous abuse of authority. One of the officers approached me, radio in hand. "You did exactly the right thing," he said, voice calm but firm. "They've been impersonating law enforcement for months. We've been tracking them, but nobody expected them to block a life-saving operation. You may have just saved more than one life today." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Months?" I asked, disbelief thick in my voice. "How is that possible? They've been here for years, running this lake like it's their kingdom." The officer nodded. "Exactly. They've been intimidating residents, claiming authority, issuing fines and restrictions that weren't legal. They were careful until today. Now the truth comes out and they're finally facing consequences." As the medics loaded the patient into the helicopter, I felt a mix of exhaustion and vindication. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with disbelief. These people had crossed lines that should never have been crossed, and for what? Pride? Control? Ego? I shook my head. The level of audacity was staggering. The lead imposter, still cuffed, glared at me with a venomous intensity. I felt a flicker of fear, quickly replaced by anger. "You're done," I said quietly, more to myself than him. "No more lies, no more pretending." One of the federal agents stepped forward, speaking into his radio. "We need statements from everyone here. This is going to be a full investigation. They won't get away with this. Not anymore." I watched as officers began collecting evidence. Fake badges, radios, uniforms, and even documents the imposters had been using to intimidate neighbors. Each piece told a story of control and deception, a reminder of how fragile safety can be when power falls into the wrong hands. I realized then just how much luck and courage had intersected today. A few minutes of delay, a wrong decision, and this story could have ended very differently. I felt my hands tremble and my chest tighten, thinking about the person in the chopper, alive because I had refused to stand down. And yet, even as relief settled in, the tension lingered. I knew this was just the beginning. These men had built a network of fear, and it wasn't going to disappear overnight. Neighbors who had once been too scared to speak up were starting to emerge, shaken but determined. Whispers of what had happened today were already spreading through the community. I couldn't help but think back to the moment I first saw those SUVs, circling, watching, pretending to be something they were. I remembered the fear, the helplessness, the absurdity of a so-called HOA patrol standing in the way of a helicopter saving a life. And I remembered the adrenaline, the panic, and the single-minded determination that pushed me forward. One of the federal agents approached me again, his expression serious. "Do you understand the gravity of what just happened here?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, voice low but steady. They weren't just breaking rules, they were risking lives, and today that almost became permanent. Someone had to stop them. He gave a small nod, and for the first time I felt a flicker of hope. These imposters would answer for their crimes. But even as they were led away in cuffs, I knew the story wasn't just about arrests. It was a warning. about vigilance, about courage, and about standing up when lives depend on it. As the helicopter lifted into the sky, carrying the patient to safety, I finally allowed myself to breathe. But the wind carried more than dust. It carried questions. How many times had this happened before? How many lives had been at risk and no one had known? And in the back of my mind, a quiet determination settled in. I had faced fear, deception, and absurdity, and I had survived. But now I was ready to see the full truth come out, no matter how shocking it might be. Because the worst part wasn't just what these men had done. It was what they thought they could get away with, and I was about to make sure they never forgot who they had crossed. They thought they were untouchable. But when the feds moved in, the full extent of their lies, deception, and danger would shock everyone, and they would finally pay. The sirens were deafening now, slicing through the calm of the lakeside like a warning. I watched from a distance, heart hammering, as uniformed federal agents poured out of black SUVs, moving with precision and authority that made the fake HOA enforcers look like children playing dress-up. Every step they took was purposeful, deliberate, and I could feel the tension vibrating in the air. The imposters froze, their arrogance evaporating as quickly as the adrenaline that had fueled them. They were no longer in control. No more smirks, no more fake badges, just the cold, undeniable reality of authority real enough to change their lives forever. I could see the panic flickering in their eyes, the fear that comes when the rules you've relied on suddenly no longer exist. One of the lead agents barked orders and the imposters flinched, instinctively raising their hands. My stomach churned, partly from relief and partly from awe. I had seen them block a life-saving helicopter, threaten neighbors, and abuse power for months. But now, in the face of true authority, they were powerless. I felt a strange sense of vindication. Every ridiculous rule they had enforced, every petty intimidation, every moment of fear they had created, it all led here. And justice, at last, was arriving. The agents moved methodically, confiscating fake badges, radios, and documents, each item a testament to the web of deception these men had spun. I stepped closer, watching as the lead imposter, the one who had blocked my path and laughed at my warnings, was handcuffed. He looked at me eyes wide, and for the first time I saw vulnerability. No bravado, no smirk, just fear. You can't do this," he stammered, voice breaking. I shook my head. "You already did this, now you'll face the consequences." My voice was steady, even though my legs were still shaking from adrenaline. "You thought you were untouchable, you weren't, and you never will be again." The other imposters were rounded up quickly, their protests drowned out by the firm commands of the agents. I couldn't help but notice the absurdity in the scene. Men who had acted like kings in a small lakeside neighborhood now being led away in cuffs, their fake power stripped in an instant. But there was no humor here, only relief and the lingering echo of danger narrowly avoided. One of the federal agents approached me, his expression serious. "Do you realize how close you came to disaster?" he asked. "They weren't just imposters, they were dangerous. If the helicopter had been delayed another minute." His voice trailed off, and I nodded, swallowing hard. I did realize. I felt every second of it, every drop of fear, every beat of adrenaline that had carried me through those moments. I glanced at the helicopter, now lifting the patient safely away. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by exhaustion. I had done everything I could, but the reality of what had almost happened weighed heavily. One wrong move, one hesitation, and it could have been catastrophic. The agents began taking statements from neighbors, documenting evidence and securing the area. I stepped aside, letting the professionals handle the situation, but I couldn't stop thinking about the months of terror these men had caused. How many others had felt powerless under their fake authority? How many lives had been endangered before today? And then it hit me, the real impact of what had just happened. This wasn't just about me or the helicopter rescue. It was about accountability. It was about exposing the dangerous illusions people create when they convince themselves that rules, uniforms, and fake authority give them the right to control others. I watched as the imposters were led to the SUVs, their faces pale, mouths open in silent protests. They had thought themselves untouchable even by the law. But here they were, reality finally catching up, forced to face the consequences of every reckless, dangerous choice they had made. I took a deep breath, letting the tension finally ease just a fraction. The adrenaline still throbbed through my veins, but the chaos was over. The helicopter had taken the patient to safety, the feds had done their work, and those who had thought themselves above the law were finally being held accountable. But even in that moment of triumph, I knew something. Stories like this don't end neatly. There would be investigations, hearings, maybe even more revelations about how deep their network of intimidation went. But I also knew this. Today, courage had mattered. Today, standing up, refusing to back down, had made all the difference. As the SUVs drove away with their cargo of arrested imposters, I felt a strange mix of relief, exhaustion, and pride. Lives had been saved. Justice had been served. And the lesson was clear. Sometimes it takes one person willing to act to stop a catastrophe, even when the odds feel impossible. And in the back of my mind, a quiet resolve settled in. I would never forget today. I would never forget how close danger had come, how fragile safety can be, and how important it is to act when it truly matters. Because when people abuse power, when lives are at stake, silence is not an option. They thought their lies and fake authority could protect them forever. But the aftermath was far more than punishment. It was a reckoning, and it changed everything for everyone involved. The lake was quiet again, almost painfully so, as if the water itself was holding its breath after everything that had happened. The helicopter had disappeared over the tree line, carrying the patient to safety. The sirens faded, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. For the first time in hours, I felt the weight of exhaustion settle over me, pressing down like a stone in my chest. My legs were sore, my hands scraped, my lungs still burned from the adrenaline. But the relief that someone had survived was stronger than any physical pain. I watched as the last of the imposters were led into the federal vehicles, their faces pale, jaws tight, eyes wide with disbelief. The arrogance they had carried like armor was gone, replaced by fear and humiliation. I couldn't help but think about all the petty fines, threats, and abuses they had inflicted over the years, and how small it had seemed until it escalated to something this dangerous. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, cautious but curious. Some whispered, some clapped quietly, and others shook their heads in disbelief. They had all lived under the shadow of fake authority for months, some even years, afraid to speak out. And now the truth had come out in the most dramatic way possible. The fear they had felt was finally replaced with a sense of relief, and I hoped empowerment. One of the federal agents approached me, his expression serious but kind. "You did everything right," he said. "You kept calm under extreme pressure, guided the chopper safely, and didn't let these imposters interfere. What you did probably saved multiple lives today." I nodded, my throat tight, trying to swallow the lump that had formed. I had acted instinctively, driven by fear and determination, but hearing those words made the hours of terror and panic feel worth it. "I just did what I had to do," I said, voice low. "I couldn't let them stop a rescue. Someone's life was on the line." The agent gave a small nod and walked away, leaving me standing there on the dock, staring out at the calm lake. The water reflected the fading light, serene and indifferent to the chaos that had just unfolded. And yet I could feel its significance. Today wasn't just about authority being abused. It was about courage, action, and refusing to let fear dictate outcomes. As I walked back to my cabin, I noticed small details I hadn't before. The crooked mailbox that had been a point of petty HOA complaints, the dock that had been threatened, the peaceful trees swaying gently in the wind. All of it had seemed trivial before, but now it felt precious. Life was fragile, authority could be misused, and every moment mattered. Later, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I reflected on everything that had happened. The imposters had been exposed, the feds had intervened, and the patient had survived. Justice had been served, but it had taken courage, quick thinking, and refusing to back down to make it happen. I thought about how easily things could have gone wrong, how small decisions, seconds of hesitation, fear, or doubt, could have changed the outcome entirely. I realized in that quiet moment that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. It's standing up when it matters most, even when the odds are against you. And today, that kind of courage had mattered. It had saved a life, exposed dangerous deception, and reminded everyone that no one is above the law, not even people who pretend to be. Neighbors continued to come by over the next few days, thanking me, sharing their relief, and telling stories of how the imposters had made them afraid to speak up. I listened, nodding, realizing that our community had survived a trial, and in surviving had grown stronger. The fear that had once ruled this lakeside neighborhood was gone, replaced by vigilance, unity, and a renewed sense of justice. As I looked out over the calm water one last time, I felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Today had tested me, challenged me in ways I never imagined, and forced me to confront fear head-on. But I had acted. I had refused to be passive. I had made a difference. And that, I realized, is all any of us can do when faced with danger, deception, or injustice. Stand tall, act with purpose, and never ever let fear dictate the fate of someone else's life. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in fiery orange and deep purple. The wind carried the faint hum of the departing helicopter, a reminder that while chaos may strike without warning, courage and determination can turn the tide. And as I sat there, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that today, against all odds, the right thing had been done. The imposters thought their lies and fake authority would protect them forever. They were wrong. Justice came, courage prevailed, and lives were saved. And in the end, that is what truly matters. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.